Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of You Could Hide to Kolob podcast. Today, we are continuing in Joseph Smith history. My name's Daniel. This is my brother, Clive.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, it is. We're in Joseph Smith history / Doctrine and Covenants, and it's a big one. There's so much to get through with Joseph Smith history, and it's not even the whole thing. So, should we just get straight into it? I've got a quote here. And do you want me to just get into it? Yeah.
Go for it.
All right. So this is Gordon B. Hinckley. He said, "This church does not belong to its prophets. Its head is the Lord Jesus Christ, whose name each of us has taken upon ourselves. We are all in this great endeavor together. We are here to assist our Father in his work and his glory. Your obligation is as serious in your sphere of responsibility as is my obligation in my sphere. No calling in this church is small or of little consequence."
All right. I think that reminds me of something we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, and that is that Jesus Christ is the main character. Jesus Christ, the main character of the Doctrine and Covenants. And certainly for me, I always keep getting wrapped up in the history and treating it as history. But Christ is he is the main character in all of this. No matter how enjoyable it is to study the physical history of our church. All right. So we're on Joseph Smith history, and we're starting with verse 27. And the actual curriculum goes all the way to verse 65. I'm not sure how much we're going to get through. It covers a really long amount of time. So it's almost, which I think is in line, right? This is a lot of historical stuff. There's no need to make the historical stuff take a month. Put the historical stuff together, and then let's get into the actual revelations.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because section 2 is the revelation of Elijah will come and restore the keys of the sealing power. But to get the backstory of how this all came about, this is the story of it in the Joseph Smith history. It's like what we talked about a little while ago, how the Book of Mormon has a story with all the doctrine embedded in it, where the Doctrine and Covenants has the doctrine in it, no story. So they've got, okay, here's the history of the story of why this came about, and there's the Doctrine and Covenants about the actual coming forth of the sealing power.
Exactly. Let's get into 27. I continued to pursue my common vocations in life until the 21st of September, 1823, so 1823. All the time suffering persecutions at the hands of all classes of men, both religious and irreligious, because I continued to affirm that I had seen a vision. So that verse is telling us that today we're starting in 1823. I think our lesson ends in 1829, so it covers a serious amount of time. But Joseph Smith is telling us that ever since his first vision, he's been getting persecuted. He doesn't get time off. He doesn't get a break. I know from the records that in Palmyra, people are regularly hating on Joseph Smith. It's very well known that he's this person that says he's seen God. And it seems like the religious people of the day have convinced the regular township that Joseph Smith is not normal. And so it's not just the one or two Methodist preachers or Presbyterian preachers that get on Joseph's case, but the regular town as well.
I guess this is something I asked you a week or so ago. Did Joseph Smith continue to, even after all the persecution, continue to say, no, I definitely saw a vision? Or did you just keep his mouth shut for a while? And I guess that really shows you the dedication of Joseph Smith. I saw a vision. I know I saw a vision, and it doesn't matter all the persecution. I'm going to continue to do it. Because in my mind, it's easy just to go, okay, look, I know it happened, and I'm just going to keep my mouth shut about it.
Yeah.
But that's just not his MO. His MO isn't to go, okay, I'll just keep my mouth shut until God gives me more instruction. No, I've seen this, and I'm going to continue to say that I've seen it.
Even amongst so much badness that he faced. So halfway down at 28, he said that he was persecuted by those who ought to have been his friends. He says that those people should have treated him kindly, and that they thought that he was deluded, and they essentially deluded crazy. They essentially just thought he was crazy. But then he gives us a glimpse into his personal life here. I was left to all kinds of temptations and mingling with all kinds of society. I frequently fell into many foolish errors and displayed the weakness of youth and the foibles of human nature, which I am sorry to say led me into diverse temptations, offensive in the sight of God. He said he was guilty of levity. He said that what he did wasn't consistent with the character. Clive, I guess I just wanted to touch on this part just for a moment, and I won't happy to answer other questions if anyone has them, but there's a couple of things that Joseph's referring to here. He's a young boy, and he tells us he's not perfect. We often incorrectly assume that every apostle and every president of the church is a perfect being. That's just contradictory, I should say, to our doctrine. These leaders aren't perfect, and we nowhere in our doctrine does it say that they are. So he's telling us I'm not perfect. He's telling us that he fell into some bad things. And if we turn the page or keep scrolling, and I think we get to verse 56 and 57 and 58, Joseph tells us some of the things that he fell into. And that was the money digging, a so-called money digging. He says that himself somewhere here. He tells us at the bottom of verse 56, hence arose the very prevalent story of my having been a money digger. So he finds a seer stone at the bottom of a well. And in the time, people were looking for treasure, and this idea of seer stones wasn't new. And a man by the name of Josiah Stowell, he employs Joseph and his dad, actually, Joseph Smith Sr. They have a deal that of everything that they find, 2/11 will be paid to the Smiths. And so we know that Joseph is part of this, and he falls into this crowd of looking for this treasure, this Spanish mine treasure. And this is, I think at least according to me, this is what he's referring to when he says he falls in with the wrong people and he doesn't hold himself to a high character. So just something interesting, Clive, even this is 1823, I think he's employed in 24 or 25. Later on, he's actually taken to court by Josiah Stowell's wife, I think. And he's sued I think it's his first time in court of something like 150 times that he was sued. He was sued for being a disorderly person. And there's a record of that. You can read all about that through various church places. I think Joseph Smith Papers has a really good write-up about it. But he's sued for doing that and he's let go at the end. So just something interesting anyway, Clive. I don't want to harp on it too much, but Joseph tells us he's fallen into something, and we've got some evidence of what that could be that's weighing on his mind.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's not the idea of being a gold digger or a treasure seeker or whatever you want to call him. That's not the sin. The sin is the people that he was around. He was around some wicked people. And the fact that he used this seer stone that's obviously ordained of God to go about with God's work, and that's what he's been using to find the gold. And so that's the sin, not the fact that he's a gold digger. Seer stone's an interesting thing, and obviously we're going to get into that when we talk more about the Urim and Thummim and the seer stone. But he said it was found in a well, but that wasn't he employed to dig a well, and he found it as he was digging the well, and he came across the seer stone?
I know it was in the well that he was digging, yeah, but I just don't know enough about the story around it. But you very well could be right. One of the things, Clive, that I just would mention is that through this money digging, let's just quote unquote, we'll just use Joseph Smith's own terminology. This is actually where he meets his wife. This is where he meets the Hales. Isaac Hale is Emma's dad. And through this acquaintance and through this operation is actually where he meets his future wife. So I definitely am not going to suggest that it's all terrible, but I guess Joseph Smith calls out the history, but through doing so, through participating in this is where he meets his wife.
All right, so we could talk about Moroni now. So this is a little while later. It's been 3 years since he's seen the first vision. And as you said, he's saying that he's sinful and it's weighing on his mind. So he's praying to the Lord, asking for forgiveness and a bit of guidance. And this is when suddenly this great light appears in his bedroom. Now, Joseph Smith's family, quite poor, and he's got a few brothers and sisters. So it's my understanding that he's sharing this bedroom with others. He's not there by himself.
Yeah, I think they have I think it's a 2-bedroom little log home. We hear this term log home all the time. Essentially, they cut down trees to make the exterior of the house. Yeah, I'm very sure it was 2-bedroom.
First of all, that's a miracle in itself. Light lights up the whole room and everyone else manages to stay asleep. But this personage appears in front of him just out of nowhere from this locked room. And he says that this is in 30, I'll just read his own words. He says, "When immediately a personage appeared at my bedside, standing in the air, for his feet did not touch the floor." This Obviously, in his mind, this only time does it happen to him when God appeared and Jesus Christ appeared. But he was frightful. I was a bit afraid, as you would be. He said at the end of verse 32, when I first looked upon him, I was afraid, but the fear soon left me. And I imagine that being like a calming presence, when the Holy Ghost touches you, it's more of a calming state. When we were talking to Keith Erickson not that long ago, he mentioned that it was a few days after Joseph Smith saw the first vision that he had this joyous feeling in him. And I can only assume it's the same sort of feeling seeing this resurrected angel appear in front of you.
What do you, in regards to that Moroni's visiting, I'm imagining just how impressed Moroni must have been to be going and speaking with Joseph.
Yeah, when we read the Book of Mormon last year in the detail that we did, you felt the last testimony of the person that was passing on the plates to the next person. Here's my final testimony, and now I get to pass it on to this person who I see ready, or the Lord sees ready. And it gets passed on, and Moroni, he's the last one. And he's alone, and he's really trying to get his point across to all of us here. This is my will and testimony. This is what I find to be true. And then he just doesn't get to pass it on. So yeah, you're right. How much joy must he feel that he has been chosen now? Okay, you get to pass it on. Here is the plates. You get to pass it on. Now he's gone. In my mind, I just think he must be just so ecstatic going, this is the chosen one. I've finally got my opportunity to pass it on. So he must have been just as excited as Joseph Smith was. But he's got a lesson to teach. And we're not going to go through all of that now, because we spoke about this last year when we did this lesson. But he's got a message to give to Joseph. And he talks about the plates, and he talks about the coming forth of Elijah, as it talks about, and things like that. So there's a couple of things, though. On the third visit, when you read the words, and again, I'm just not going to read it all because we'll end up just reading the whole thing. But Moroni, he adds a bit more information. To me, it's like he's emphasizing the urgency on the importance of the future tasks that he needs to do. He also warns him that the adversary is going to come after him, which we'll talk about later, which it does very strongly. And he also adds a little bit more that Joseph needs to talk to his father about the things that he's seen here tonight. And to me, it's gone from this personal, private revelation to open it up to the community. Go to your father. Your family will all be involved. And later on, we talk about how Emma goes with him, and just a lot of people are involved in this. So it's more, okay, this is the start. This is the start of this congregation, I guess. Go and see your father. Go and tell him everything you've heard and you've seen, and he will believe you. And I thought that was just great, because it was just like okay, this isn't just, it's not going to be just you have to explain to everyone what's going on. Now you've got all these things backing you.
Yeah, really interesting. I agree. I think the timing of the Lord in terms of knowing what Joseph's gone through, and he's preparing the rest of his family to be able to support Joseph on this mission.
Just one other thing, Daniel, before we talk about what happens next. I just want to talk about one thing that he mentions, because he goes back, he quotes a lot of scripture from Malachi, and he quotes from Malachi chapter 4. And obviously he talks about the coming of the fathers, children to their fathers to their children, which we talk about, the sealing power and the new and everlasting covenant. But there's one other thing he mentions in chapter 4, verse 1. For behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly shall be stubble, and the day that cometh shall burn unto them, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. And it seems a bit harsh, especially when all these things that Joseph Smith have gone through, and he's just gone, okay, things are going to get difficult. And this always was on my mind for a long time. It doesn't matter how righteous you are in the church, things are going to get difficult, but it's not really the case. I'm just going to read something here from Commentary on the Doctrine and Covenants, and it says, that which makes the day to come so great and terrible is not confined to the distress of the people and nations because of famine and war, but more particularly it will be great and dreadful to all of those who find themselves outside of the great family of our Father in heaven, because they have not obtained these everlasting sealed ordinances so essential to our exaltation. So it's all together. He's talking about this new and everlasting covenant, the sealing power, and the things that Elijah's going to do. It's not here's a bit of doctrine, here's a bit of doctrine. It all comes together. It's all, everything that he's talking about, it's all connected.
What's the understanding from Joseph here, though? That's the other thing, right? He quotes a lot of scriptures, and he talks about everlasting life and the sealing power that you've just mentioned. I don't know if Joseph knows much about this, and is he saying to Moroni, "Hey, I'm learning this for the first time. Can you slow down?"
Yeah.
It's a lot, and of course, the Lord brings forth things in His own time. But for Joseph, it's hasn't seen anything for 3 years. Tells us he feels weighed down in his sins and needs to get forgiveness. And he gets his forgiveness. Moroni says, "Sins are forgiven you," and then just goes whack. Here's a whole bunch of doctrine. And yeah, I don't know what Joseph would have thought about it, or in terms of, hey, this is a bit much, or just, okay, I'm just going to take this on face value and assume that something else will happen later. It's a lot to take in.
It is a lot to take in. Yeah. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I wonder if it was more like, look, there's so much to tell you in such little time.
Yeah.
So any opportunity that comes, we're going to reveal some doctrine to you. Because we know that Joseph went to get the plates, and every single time, or at least for the first 3 or 4 times, he wasn't allowed to. And every single time that he was told he couldn't do it right now, he's given it another piece of doctrine, whether it be things that he saw or things that he heard.
I'll give a little bit of a quick abbreviation of kind of the next few years. And that is that let's just start with that day. So he wakes up that morning after, well, he doesn't wake up. He says that the day came straight away after Moroni's visits. He's very tired. He goes out into the field. We know that Alvin was there, and we know that his dad was there as well. Alvin gives him a bit of grief. He's quite tired, and maybe he's not performing his labors as strong or as quickly as he usually does. Tells him to, let's get on with this. And his dad sees him, and his dad tells him maybe go inside. He walks off to go get some rest. He goes to climb over a fence, falls backwards, and Moroni comes again for the 4th time. But on this occasion, so Moroni again teaches him, but on this occasion he says, "Go tell your dad." And so he goes and tells his dad, and Joseph Smith Sr. says something like, "Oh, all is well, go and attend to these things." So Joseph leaves, and he mentions that as soon as he goes to the hill Cumorah, he recognizes it straight away. And I love this, that he recognizes the hill, and the description from Moroni must have been so good, or he must have shown him, hey, it's here, that he recognized it straight away, and he goes straight to the area where the Book of Mormon is kept, and he uses a log to pry open the rock, and inside is the things that were promised, the Sword of Laban's in there, Urim and Thummim's in there, and whatnot. Book of Mormon's there. He can't get the Book of Mormon. He says, "I can't get it. I can't obtain this book." And Moroni appears to him, and he says that, no, you're not ready, essentially. Joseph reports that he gets a shock as well. I don't know if it's a lightning bolt shock from the book, but he gets some kind of shock. And Moroni says, "You're not ready." And then he shows him a vision of Satan and all of his angels. And so Joseph knows that he can't get it. Moroni tells him, "Come back every year from then on." And then after that is when Joseph does the money digging scenario.
Last year, do you remember last year we talked about the times that Joseph Smith went, and there was a year missing that we couldn't figure out?
Yeah.
If anyone listening doesn't understand, maybe go back to I think it was our first episode.
Yeah.
Last year we talked about it. So
that was an episode before we had any kind of microphones, and we actually had zero idea what we were doing.
That's right. Yeah. And the quality
similar
was
to today, but we've got better microphones.
That's right. We just sound more confident because we're talking faster. But I found it. Well, look, I didn't find it, but I found some information about one of the times there was one that wasn't mentioned last time. So
we got the first time he goes, which is the day that Moroni sees him.
Yeah, and he tries to grab the plates and he gets shocked.
He gets shocked.
Yeah.
Second time he goes, he was hoping it's with Alvin.
That's
that right?
No, the second time he went, got the plates out.
He got the plates out,
and
looks at the plates, and then they go, and then the plate disappear, and they end up back in the hole.
He turned to the box to try and cover it up, turned back to the plates, boom.
Plates are gone. He's like, "Oh no, the plates are gone." He turns back, and they're back in the hole.
And Moroni, you didn't listen. I told you to keep your eye on them the whole time.
And then he's told, next year when you come back, come with the right person.
Come with the right person. Who's the right person? And Alvin is the right person.
Yeah, but then Alvin dies.
That's right. It was essentially, he went back and he was shown in vision. And I don't know if Moroni was trying to emphasize the point here, but Moroni shows Joseph in vision the future and the role that he would play in the restored gospel. And I wonder if it was like a, look, you've really got to get yourself sorted because this is what it's going to end up like. Still at the time, he was doing the right things, but he wasn't hanging around the right people. And so I guess I wonder if in Moroni's mind he's going, all right, look, here's what's going to happen with the gospel. Here's how big the church is going to be. Here's your role. This is why I need you to be fully ready for what's going to happen.
A very quick story for you, Clive, about a guy called Willard Bean, a Mr. Bean, actually. The church wanted to, this back in 1915, the church wanted to proselyte in Palmyra, and Palmyra was the worst place in the country. Joseph Fielding Smith actually said that it's the most prejudiced place in the world. So don't go there. But George Albert Smith is sitting in conference, and this man walks in at the back of the conference. George Albert Smith's got no idea who he is, but he immediately reports that he almost hears a voice to say that this is the man. This is the man that you've been looking for. So he goes after conference and he talks to this guy. His name's Willard Washington Bean, and he's a former boxer, and he's currently a trainer for another boxer in the US. And fast forward not too long, but he's set apart to go on a mission to Palmyra, him and his wife, Rebecca. So he goes there and the locals hate him. And this story, by the way, why am I telling this story? This is about how we ended up buying the Hill Cumorah. So they hate him, right? Within a couple of days, there's a mob comes to his house and says, "Yous have got to leave. Mormons aren't welcome here." And Willard Bean, being a boxer, former boxer, says, "We're staying and I'll fight yous. I'll fight one at a time, or I can fight three of you at a time, but we're not going, and we can fight it out if you want." And so he lives there. A couple of years go by and he walks to the Hill Cumorah. A man comes out with a shotgun and says, "Mormons are not allowed on my farm." So he leaves. But then years later, he's been there for 8 years, and he becomes friends with this man who owns the farm. His name's James H. Inglis. And he becomes friends, and this Mr. Inglis says to Willard Bean that he will sell him 98 acres of the Hill Cumorah. It's got a great view of the western part of the Hill Cumorah, according to the read that we have. It's $11,000 is the price that he wants. And so Willard Bean, Brother Bean, he writes to the presiding bishop and says, "We want this. We want this property. We can purchase part of our history here. We can purchase part of the Hill Cumorah." So anyway, the church does. And Willard Bean goes on to be very successful. In fact, one little quirk about all of that is that James Inglis says to Willard, your church can buy it from me, but it has to go in your name, because I can't have any of the townspeople going through the records and finding that I sold it to the church direct. So the church funds the purchase of these 90 odd acres of the Hill Cumorah and funds it, and it goes into the name of Willard Bean, Willard Washington Bean, who I'm assuming eventually transfers it over. So just a little bit of a story there, Clive, about the Hill Cumorah and about how we actually ended up. So it was all thanks to this guy that George Albert Smith had no idea who he was. He walks into conference and George Albert Smith realizes instantly, I don't know who that guy is, but he's the person I've been looking for.
That's amazing.
Yeah, what a great story.
So then, yeah, like you said, he goes with his wife, Emma, because he's then told, all right, you got to come back. You got to bring someone with you as well. So then he uses the seer stone actually to figure out who to bring. And he's told to bring Emma.
So interesting. So then he gets the plates, he puts them in a log because he thinks he's being followed. He goes in the dead of night with Emma. Emma waits in the cart down at the bottom of the hill. He walks up, grabs them, puts them in a log, and then jumps back in the cart and goes with Emma. And the next morning, the family are there. They're anxiously waiting. And Lucy, his mother, says, "Joseph, did you get them?" And he plays a prank on them. He puts his head in his hands and he looks all worried. And he says, "Did you get them?" And he tells them that he's got them. And he says that they're marvelous. He says that they're better than he could ever expected.
You know what's funny about that prank that he plays? Every single time he goes home, he is asked, every time, did you get them? And that's just got to be the toughest for him to go, no, I didn't get them. Like he's got to, first of all, he's got to face Moroni. Moroni's gone, you're not ready yet. Then he's got to go back to his family and go, I didn't get them. Moroni said I wasn't ready yet. Every single time. And so it's a funny prank because he gets back and they're like, okay, do you have them now?
He's
And
like,
he's going, yes, I do.
yeah. And they're like, not this again. Yeah. Okay, so he's got them and he's told his family that he's got them. And then he brings them to the house. Word spreads quickly that he's got them as well, by the way. This is where it gets even more challenging for Joseph. He hides them in different places. He hides them under the floorboards. He hides them in a whole bunch of places. He later on, and I'm just skipping forward here, just in the context of what we're talking about, he hears that he's going to be tarred and feathered. So he hides them. And Joseph knows very well that he's a target. And he's a target of people who want to get the plates because they say they're made of gold, and they're in not a very poor, they're in a very poor area. So people are going, these things are made of gold. Joseph Smith, this random guy that's from a real poor family, he's just a laborer. He's got something that can transcend my family, and I can have generational wealth if I can get my hands on these gold plates and use them for the monetary value that they are.
Yeah. Do you think that people went, because he's saying, I've got these gold plates from the Lord. Do you think people have gone, okay, he used to dig for treasure and he found a few bits and pieces here and there. He's actually just got gold. And so I want the gold. Because if they go, yeah, he's got gold plates from God, you're not going to go and beat him up and steal them.
Right.
Unless in your mind you've gone, oh, he's just found gold. Do you think that was more of, because if somebody said to us today, look, I found gold plates, and the prophet comes out and goes, no, he didn't find gold plates or whatever because the Lord hasn't told us, we'd just ignore it. We wouldn't go, well, let's go find him and see what he's got. It would just fizzle out. So why do you think so many people went, let's go get this guy who claims he's got gold plates from the Lord?
I think I got a couple of answers. I think that Satan was working overtime to stir up so many people. And as Joseph does the first vision, oh no, Satan's, oh no, he's done it. He's done the first vision. And then he's going, oh no, he's got the plates. No. Okay. And then he really tries to kick the people into overdrive to harass, bully, physically attack, steal, ruin the lives of his own, of the whole family, not just Joseph's, not just the only one involved here, but everyone knows who's related to Joseph Smith Jr. So I think there's a couple of things there, but also, yeah, the value and how much money someone can make from this thing was hefty as well. The plates were hefty. So if they were solid gold, they'd be worth quite a bit of money. You're not going to have to work for a very long time if you can turn them into some necklaces.
I have a bit of a question, so I'm just going to read it. So Joseph Smith and Emma, there's a lot of persecution, and they felt like they needed to be out of there. They needed to move out of that place, especially because they got the plates. And I guess it was just a difficult time. I'll just go halfway through 61. The persecution, however, became so intolerable that I was under the necessity of leaving Manchester and going with my wife to I shouldn't have chosen one with such difficult names for the places. Susquehanna, I don't know, in the state of Pennsylvania, while preparing
Susquehanna. Susquehanna, of course. Are you not native to the area?
All right, there we go. This is the part I want to get to. While preparing to start, being very poor, and the persecution so heavy upon us, there was no probability that we would ever be otherwise. In the midst of our afflictions, we found a friend in a gentleman by the name of Martin Harris, who came to us and gave me $50 to assist with our journey. So I AI'd that, and I asked AI what $50 in around 1830 was, and he said today's money is about $1,700 to $1,800.
Did it say, give me $50, I'm taking over the world because I am AI?
If I said to you, hey, maybe not you, maybe just some guy who claimed to be my friend, and say, hey, can I have $1,700? I want to move. It'd be something quite difficult for someone to give up. But Martin Harris, being a really good guy, actually, through the church, we always talk about how bad Martin Harris, not how bad, we always look at him in a negative light, but he was a really nice guy who gave the prophet $50 so that he could take his journey and he could move out, being in such a difficult time for his family. Now he's got the plates and he's trying to focus on doing that. It's important for him to move to a different area. So he continued, so he goes on, but in a timely aid was I enabled to reach the place of my destination in Pennsylvania, and immediately after my arrival there, I commenced copying the characters of the plates. I copied a considerable number of them by the means of the Urim and Thummim. I translated some of them, which I was able to do in between I arrived at the house of my wife's father. So, but now see, he's saying that he copied them down, but it's my understanding, and you'd probably know a bit more. This was actually when Emma was the scribe, right? So he would dictate, because obviously he wrote down some of the characters, which we'll talk about in a minute, but he'd said here that he was translating some of them. Is this when Emma was the scribe?
Yeah, that's right. He, first of all, these are all accounts that we have not from Joseph, from his mom and a couple of other people. But in his first attempt, he actually wrote down characters and then wrote down what the translation of those characters were. And I'm imagining that as almost this character equals the word X, this character equals word Y. And then so you can put the Book of Mormon together like that. From what I understand, that was the first attempt before Joseph was more free flowing with able to translate the book. But I might just take you back a little bit, Clive, because there's something really interesting about Lucy and Martin Harris and about the $50 that you were just mentioned. So Lucy and Martin Harris hear about Joseph Smith. The Harrises do have a little bit of money. They're farmers and they've got a few businesses, I think. So they got a bit of coin behind them. And they hear about these plates and they want to go and suss them out. They want to go and learn for themselves. And in fact, it was Lucy Harris who goes and works with Joseph, or not works in terms of translating the plates, but meets Joseph first and is more inclined to help with the Book of Mormon first than Martin Harris. Even though Lucy Harris is the one that is responsible for losing the Book of Lehi later on, it's in their first encounter, she's the one that is more than happy to help with the translation. So she goes to she first of all goes to the Smith's house. This is Martin Harris's wife, Lucy Harris. And she's talking to Joseph's mum, also named Lucy. And she says that she likes the idea and that she wants to give them some money. She wants to pay them to see the book. Joseph tells her that she can't see the book, but ends up, just saying to her, you're not going to be able to see them. Lucy Harris then actually goes away and she reports that she has a dream where she sees the plates and she sees an angel. And so she wakes up and she is keen as mustard to help with the plates. She's convinced that they're real. And so Joseph ends up accepting a $28 loan from her. So $28 ends up exchanging hands first. And Martin Harris, though, isn't as convinced. He needs a little bit more work. So while his wife is all in and giving out this $28, Martin Harris goes and interviews different people in the family and then brings their stories together to see if any of their stories don't match. And that was his way of trying to learn or trying to weed out if there was a problem. Then if you interview 3 or 4 people, if not all 3 or 4 people give you the exact same story, then someone somewhere is lying or someone somewhere doesn't understand. And so that would be enough for Martin to say, no, there's cracks in your story, not happening. Of course, he doesn't learn of any discrepancies in the stories at all. So he's convinced. Martin hears that there is a plan to tar and feather Joseph Smith. So he gives them this $50 to pay off some debt so that they can leave the town. If they leave without paying off the debt, they'll end up going to court and things will just get worse and worse. So they give the $50. Joseph pays off the debt and Lucy leaves. And there's a report of a mob of 50 men who are going around the streets looking for Joseph. So Emma leaves. A couple of days later, Joseph leaves. Emma leaves as well and takes a weapon with her, by the way. This is how bad it was. She's pregnant at the time. But it's so bad that this pregnant woman needs to arm herself with a bat or sticks of some sort. So Joseph takes the plates, he hides them. This is where we learn here that he puts them in a barrel, and so they're hidden when they're transported. He goes and they go and stay with Emma's parents. Isaac Hale, who's Emma's dad, still doesn't like the prophet from his money digging days. He says something like, anyone who believes that book is here, or that book's not allowed here, or something like that. Unless someone can show in the book, he wants nothing to do with it. So that happens. And so they end up staying. And this is where the first translation of the book happens, is what I was mentioning before. So Martin Harris is a very interesting character, and yeah, he funds the early church.
It's funny, isn't it?
A lot of it.
Because just going back to the way that they were brought into the church, if Martin Harris, it wasn't a bad way of him finding out the church was true by interviewing, going, okay, there's no way this can't not be true. It just shows that not everybody's going to read the Book of Mormon, pray about it, and then get a testimony that it's true. It just shows that there's so many different ways we can receive a testimony of the gospel, whether it be having a dream and then going, okay, it's definitely true, or finding out that there's no way it can't not be true, or any other way. And it's just great, because it just, at the very early church, just shows that there's so many different ways of you coming to the conclusion that it must be true.
Thoughts I've had, Clive, is if we think about Joseph Smith's family and Emma's family, they had wealth and then they didn't have wealth. We know about the ginseng trade, and so they could have had some serious wealth, which would have ended up them not being in Palmyra. They would have lived elsewhere. They were only forced to move Palmyra, of course, because of that year without summer.
Yep, the volcano.
That's right. Now, if they were wealthy, that wouldn't have mattered to them. So they ended up in Palmyra. My point here is, what about Martin Harris? Martin Harris was a second generation in the area and had wealth. What if Martin didn't have wealth? Was the Lord guiding Martin and Martin's decisions, or Martin's dad and Martin's dad's decisions, and helping with things around and blessing their lives, and funneling him in and keeping him in Palmyra and making sure that he's able to fund the church, like in the way that the same effect but opposite outcome for the Smiths?
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah, the Smiths were poor and humble, so they were able to receive it. Martin Harris was rich, and so he was able to help fund it. Yeah, didn't Martin Harris fund the first, was it 5,000 copies of the Book of Mormon?
Yeah, he takes a loan and he funds the printing of the book. So one of the things that happens with Joseph is he wants to go and get the plates. He wants to go and get his translation verified, authorized as it was. And so Martin Harris heads to New York City and he meets with a couple of distinguished professors. And so one of them, I guess the most famous, is a guy called Charles Anthon. And he meets with Charles Anthon and he shows him. And Charles Anthon says, yes, I can see that's Egyptian. Perhaps there's a bit of Assyric in there. Perhaps there's a couple of other languages, I think he says, that he can see in these characters. But he certifies that they're true, and he certifies that the translation that Joseph has of these characters is true. And so he gives Martin Harris a certificate. And then as Martin Harris is leaving, he says, oh, how did you actually come across this record? And Martin Harris says that there's a gold Bible that's been unearthed, and there's a young man who's translated it. And Charles Anthon says, oh, can I see that certificate? And Harris just gives it to him, and he rips it up. And he says, this is where he says that he can't translate a sealed book. And he says if Joseph brings him the gold plates, he'll translate it for him.
I wonder how different it would be now if Martin Harris hadn't done it that way. If he'd gone, just something we found, or something, and we got that certificate, I wonder how different things would be. But just from something that you mentioned there, this is all happening and it's fulfilling prophecy. Isaiah chapter 29 is basically all about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. It starts to talk about, the beginning part is about the doctrine in the Book of Mormon, then it talks about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, then it's spreading across the world. But Isaiah 29 verse 11 says, and the vision of all is become unto you, this is a vision, the coming out, the words of a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one that is learned. So obviously this guy, what'd you say his name was again?
Charles Anthony.
Charles Anthony. Obviously, this is the learned man. He knows all about translating different languages, saying, "Read this, I pray thee." And he saith, "I cannot, for it is sealed." Right? And the book is delivered to him that is not learned. So this is Joseph Smith saying, "Read this, I pray thee." And he saith, "I am not learned." So there's this one learned man who cannot read a sealed book. And then there's this not learned man who doesn't say that I can't read it, but he just says, "I'm not learned." I looked at this verse in a few of the Bibles that I've got. And one of them, the Dutch Bible from 100 years ago, says, in the Dutch Bible, the unlearned man says, "I cannot read," which is funny because one of the things that Emma describes Joseph is he's really bad at reading. Just another proof that the translation is incredible and of God. Right there, fulfilling doctrine, fulfilling prophecy, that these things are to come about. It's interesting.
What a fascinating story. We get to Charles Anthony, and that's really close. That's actually where we end the lesson. The kind of next things that start happening is the loss of the book of Lehi, and then we go into more revelations. When this happens, this is now when Joseph starts getting revelation after revelation. And so things really kick off. We'll definitely be getting straight into that next week. But that'll do for us this week on this episode. If you could hide to Kolob Podcast, thanks for tuning in. Catch us on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. And we will keep diving into Doctrine and Covenants. We're loving some questions that are coming through as well about the early history of the church. Keep them coming and we'll put them into our lessons. I'll put them into our episodes and answer them as best we can. We will catch you next week. Thanks for tuning in.